Our weed of the week is one we don't talk often about here at Ag PhD. It's a tough rangeland weed. It's sagebrush.
Well, sagebrush is a perennial weed, and that means it's going to keep coming back and back and back, and it's going to get worse and worse and worse every year.
It's not just a weed.
If you don't stop it.
It's a shrub.
Well, it is, and it's not a great big shrub in most cases because it's not growing in the best land. Typically, it's going to get 3 feet tall or so, but if you do have really good, deep, heavy soils and plenty of moisture, it can get to be a 10-foot tall shrub, but it's one that you want to stop. Now, here's the thing. A lot of times I'm talking to ranchers that say, well, I don't want to spend a lot of money on the pasture. And I understand that thinking, that my pasture rent is only this much. I don't want to spend that much on weed control out there. I could just rent more pasture ground. You can, but we're running out of rangeland. We don't have a lot of pasture ground anymore, and farmers and ranchers are really having a tough time finding enough. So stopping things like sagebrush can improve your pasture so much. You're going to get so much more growth out there if you take some of these some weeds out of there. Like sagebrush, for example, takes up a lot of moisture and a lot of nutrients. If you wipe it out, you're going to have easily double the grass production out there, which means your stocking or your head per acre is going to go way
Before
up.
we say double the grass production, we can't make you that promise because you might have 3 sagebrush plants in the field.
Right, but I'm saying in that spot.
Sure. Well, if we're just talking about that spot, I'd say it's going to be a lot more than that, because what can happen with the sagebrush is it covers the ground, so there's no sunlight hitting the ground, and to your point, no water and nutrients for those grass plants, so it's going to improve it a lot. So we don't know what percentage it's going to increase anything, but we do know this. It's a tough weed and shrub to control. Normally, when we're talking about these woody species, we talk tordon or chaparral. Well, you might get a little suppression out of tordon and chaparral, and both of those have long residuals, so there's no problem with that, but it's just, they're not the most effective products on sagebrush. For sagebrush, we're usually talking about spike. And if you've watched Ag PhD for many years, you probably have only heard us speak about spike about 3 times over 20 years, because it's not common in our area.
No, it isn't, but 1.5 pounds to 2.5 pounds of spike per acre generally is the recommendation for sagebrush. Now, you can look in different areas of the country where sagebrush is really prevalent, and you can see one pasture literally right across the fence from another where there's no sagebrush, and another pasture is just completely loaded with it. It's that a farmer invested some money, maybe only one time, and wiped it out.
Well, let's talk about this too in terms of the investment, because quite often where sagebrush is, there isn't a lot of rainfall. Well, with spike, you're going to lay it on the soil surface. Now you've got to have a significant amount of rainfall for it to get into the root and then get absorbed through that root system and kill that plant. And a lot of times what will happen is it will brown up the plant, then it'll kind of green up again a little later, and then it'll brown up again after that. Don't get too worried about that. You're probably still going to get control, but it just takes time. Sometimes it takes 2 or 3 years before you really see the results of that spike application.
Well, sagebrush can be a big problem and definitely reduces the amount of grass you can produce in your pastures. Get it under control. Use 1.5 pounds to 2.5 pounds of spike. That's all the time we have for this week's Weed, but Iron Talk is coming up next.